we have the 70 AD, we have Titus wipe everything out, and then we go a long time and just share some of that history of what happened in there
Okay.
that kind of led up to the founding in 48 of the
Okay.
state of Israel.
All right. That's a good point. Most Christians have a pretty good idea of the history of Israel up to 70 AD. But
Yeah,
after that, it just drops off the table. Uh,
I'm guilty, bro. You
and
helped me
and that's
tremendously.
and that and that's one of the big problems, because what came to pass was probably as big as the 70 AD event was the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135,
Yes.
because when that was defeated by the Romans, Emperor Hadrian said, "I've had the Jews are nothing but troublemakers. I've had enough of these people. I'm done with them." So they
Yep.
plowed the city of Jerusalem under. It was just plowed to bare ground. They kicked all the Jews out of Jerusalem. They were not allowed in the city, period. There were still a lot of Jews living in the area. A lot of them had been slaughtered, but there were still a lot living there. They kicked them all out of the city, and he renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina, and also named the region Palestine. So that's where the name of the Palestinians comes from, and the reason he named it Palestine, it was actually named after the Philistines to get rid of the Jewishness of the area. So that's
Yeah.
what's really interesting. People don't realize there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. There is no Palestinian heritage. There was no one called a Palestinian until Yasser Arafat called them Palestinians in the 1960s. So so that's where the name Palestine came from. It was done by Hadrian. He kicked all the Jews out of Jerusalem, and there were no Jews allowed back into Jerusalem until the Muslims conquered Jerusalem in somewhere around 600 AD. So for there was 450 500 years there that there were no Jews allowed in Jerusalem. And it is so ironic by today's culture that it was the Muslims that let them back in.
I
So,
know, right?
it was a money thing, because the Jews
Yeah.
were good merchants, and so the Muslims were traders. They were merchants, and so they let them back in. And so Islam, or the Muslims, pretty much controlled the area all the way through the Ottoman Empire. And in World War One, the Ottoman Empire chose the wrong side. They sided with Germany, and of course, it was the age of British imperialism and British colonialism and all of that good stuff. And the British ended up in charge of Palestine after World War One. And there were highlights there where the Balfour Declaration, and all of those things, and wanting to give the land back to the Jews. But the real interesting thing that most people don't understand, and there's a book that I highly, highly recommend by a lady by the name Joan Peters, and I actually remember the title of this one, and the name of it is From Time Immemorial, and it's about this thick. And it's like a textbook, but it is so interesting because Joan Peters, and I believe she was New York Times, but she was a reporter for one of the major newspapers, and she set out to prove that the Jews did not belong in the promised land, that it wasn't the promised land, that the land belonged to the Palestinians, and the Jews should just leave. And by the time she finished her research, she had done a complete 180 and wrote a book on why the Jews should have control of the area that is called Palestine. And she detailed it so well and so thoroughly. Uh, but but in a nutshell, the Jews started to feel the call to come back into their land in the 19th century. And Jews started immigrating into the region of Palestine. The area that is today Israel, nobody wanted it. It was a wasteland in southern Syria, in the southern part in the Ottoman Empire for years and years. it was, Mark Twain wrote about what a disaster, and how the land was absolutely good for nothing, and people shouldn't even worry about it because it was nothing but waste and desert. And the Jews started moving in and made the desert bloom, and they made it this great land, and they started all these businesses in the 19th century. And the people that are today called the Palestinians, their ancestors moved from other Arab countries, whether it was in Transjordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, or Syria. They all moved into the land. Why? To work for the Jews, because the Jews were paying more money than they could make anywhere else. And so those people were that moved into the region of Palestine in the 19th century, and the Arab population boomed, because it's just like here in the South, the slave population boomed. In the South, we have so many African Americans had so many African Americans in the South, because they were the descendants of the slaves that were brought in. It was the same situation in Palestine. The population of the area boomed in Arabs, not so much in Jews, because the Jews were the masters and the Arabs were the workers. And so they
Yep.
needed the workers, and that's why you had such a big Arab population. And so that's what happened. There was a big Arab population moved in to work for the Jews, and that's what happened. But then when you come into the 20th century, and there is this idea of a Jewish homeland, all of a sudden the Arabs start getting pretty testy about it.
Yep.
That's a vast understatement. And, and
You put it
they
very nicely.
and
Yes.
they
They're
and
still a little testy about
yeah,
it.
they're still a little testy about it.
Just a
So
hair.
so they so so they started rebelling against their Jewish overlords, because they did not want a Jewish state. And of course, then there was the mandate for Palestine by the British, and they gave this whole area that included not only modern day Israel, but modern day Jordan, and that was set aside for the Jewish homeland. But then in 1922, they divided that up, and everything east of the Jordan River was given to the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan for a, guess what? A Palestinian state, what we would call a
Yep.
Palestinian state, but at the time, a separate homeland for the Arabs that didn't want to live under the Jews. But no, none of them moved over there. They all wanted to stay in Israel because they had good jobs, they had good things going on for them there, but they still did not want the Jews getting their own nation. And of course, this went on back and forth throughout the 1920s and the 1930s. There were Arab riots against the mandate for Palestine, and there was guerrilla warfare going on. There were constant attacks of the Jewish population by the Arabs, because they did not want the land turned over to Israel, and for a nation. And of course, then 1948 came along, and I'll tell you, the thing about 1948 as an American citizen that gives me such pride in that we had one president that actually stood for the word of God. The when the Jewish people declared their state, I believe on May 14th or May 15th, 1948, no one, no international entity recognized the state of Israel. They were waiting to see what the United States of America would do. And you had this little thing called the discovery of oil in Arabia
Yep.
along that period of time. And the president of the United States at the time was Harry Truman. Now, Harry Truman had a lot of problems. He had a lot of things that you and I would disagree with that he did, and his policies and so forth and so on. But Harry Truman was, I think he became a Presbyterian, but he grew up a Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
And he was a man that knew what the Bible said about Israel being in their land in the last time. And all of his advisors advised him, do not, do not recognize the state of Israel. Do not do it. Because, and the excuse was, if you do that, they're going to be annihilated within a day or two. The Arabs will go in and they'll annihilate them. You can't do this. You'll kill them all. But that was not the reason. The reason was because these people, these advisors wanted Arab oil, and they did not want to upset the Arabs in the region. So they were heavily advising Truman not to recognize the state of Israel. Harry Truman went into his office by himself and wrote out the acceptance of Israel as a state all on his own against the advice of his advisors, and brought it out without telling anybody what he was going to do. And here was a man that was in the White House, that before that there would not be a man with that kind of guts until Donald Trump came along.
Yeah.
We had no Ronald Reagan included. There was no president in the Oval Office from the time of Harry Truman that would have had the guts to do what he did, to recognize the state of Israel. Israel was recognized as a state as officially, and other nations then fell in line behind the United States. The Arabs surrounding Israel the Arab League declared war on Israel, and of course Israel offered citizenship to all the people living there, including the so-called Palestinians. The Arabs who lived in Israel were offered full citizenship in the new nation, but the Arab League advised them, don't do that. Leave, go flee across the Jordan River, get out of there, because we're going to wipe this nation off the face of the earth. And guess what? You will not only be given your land and your home you have now, you'll get what the Jews have got too. And of
Yeah.
course, the Jews were wealthy. They had the wealth of the land, a lot of them. Now, there were some that were living in poverty, but for the most part, they were the ones that were running things. And so the idea was, hey, you guys go over here and let's start this refugee camp, and you just wait there a few days, because we're going to wipe them off the face of the earth, and you'll get everything. It'll all be yours. And so they talked the majority of the Palestinians into leaving the area, becoming refugees. And that's how we got Palestinian refugees, because they listened to the Arab League instead of accepting Israel's offer, which was an offer for full citizenship. And again, that's the first time they missed an opportunity to have an opportunity to do what was the right thing and have peace in the region. But they left, and they went in these refugee camps, and Jordan didn't want them. Egypt didn't want them. Nobody wanted them, but they went there. Now they went into the what is called the West Bank and Gaza, because when the Arabs all attacked Israel, that was the battlefront. That was the front line, became the West Bank, and that territory was ceded to Jordan, and the area which we know today as Gaza, and all the things that's going on there came from the fact that the Egyptian armies had that penetration into the area, and those two places became places for the Palestinian refugees to take up residence there in 1948. When all of that happened, the rest of the land was controlled by Israel when the attacking nations pulled back, and quote, peace was declared.